Good evening, Holliston, and welcome to a special Friday edition of the Holliston School Committee. It is January 30th, and we are happy to be here. We are welcoming James Kimo Carter as a candidate for superintendent. I think we will first start by introducing ourselves, and then we'll let you have some time to introduce yourself, and then we'll get into some questions.
Sure.
Okay? So we'll start at the end.
Awesome. Yes. Hi, Kimo. Franco Gores. I've been on school committee now for 2 years. I'm on the budget subcommittee as well as chair of the communications subcommittee. And I have 3.5-year-olds not in the district and a 1-month-old.
But they're coming.
They're coming. They're coming fast. Yes. Not fast enough, though.
Hi, I'm Hillary Bresnahan. I've also been on school committee for 2 years, and I have 2 children in the district.
Hi, Tracy Flecker. I've been on school committee for less than a year, and I have 5 children in the district, each of the schools.
Okay.
And I'm Sarah Fitzgerald. I've been on for 3 years, and 3 children. 1 just graduated and is in college, and then I have a senior and an 8th grader, so we're kind of spread out.
Welcome, Dawn Naborski, and I have 5 children, 4 of which have graduated from the district, and thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Kimo, nice to meet you. Dan Alfred. I have been on the school committee for, it's my 3rd year now. I was on the finance committee for 11 years before that. And I have a 7th grader and a 9th grader, and I'm chair of the budget subcommittee.
Hi, I'm Joe Peru. I was elected the same year as Hillary and Frank to the school committee, currently serving as the Superintendent Evaluation Subcommittee Chairman, and I am the father of a 5-year-old son.
Okay, good.
So if you would like to take a few minutes and introduce yourself, and maybe also give us an overview of how and why you got into education, and just why Holliston? Why are you here?
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed my day today. I just want to start by thanking everyone who is involved in my very busy schedule as I toured all the schools, met with students, met with teachers, met with parents and guardians, town officials, administrators, principals. There's a lot that's wonderful that is happening here in Holliston, and I'm going to start with why Holliston. Holliston has so much going for it. It is on the cusp, in my opinion, it's on the cusp of becoming a world-class school district. There's a lot of good work that's happening in the schools. What particularly impressed me when I saw the instruction, I got to go into a number of different kinds of classes, particularly at the middle school and the high school, where kids were participating. I observed effective teaching, and when I met with the students, and I asked them one of those neutral questions where they could choose whether they could, praise the schools in the district or complain about the schools in the district, to a person, they all said that they felt seen and heard in their classroom, and that they can go to any teacher that they wanted to, and they trusted them to help them. And that is such a powerful statement coming from our students, and that is a great start, area of strength that as a district we can build on as we move forward. So really a credit to the students and to their teachers, and to all the good work that's happening in Holliston. They're very excited about this opportunity. So a little bit about me. How did I start? I'm originally from Hawaii, and that's my name. My name is a Hawaiian name for James. So my birth certificate name is James, but no one ever called me James ever since I can remember. My father, who's also from Hawaii, and he was born there as well, always called me Kimo. And my father is from the military. And in our house, if your father calls you Kimo, you're Kimo. And that's how I kept my name as I moved east there. And I'm actually kind of proud of my original name. And it does, talk a little bit about my Hawaiian roots. I started in education, not really knowing that I was going to go into education, but my first job out of college was as a program aide at Perkins School for the Blind in Watertown. I think they hired me because I'm big. because I was working with 18 to 22-year-old two boys that were also big, and they were in the apartment program at Perkins, where we were working hard to make sure that they could develop skills to be as independent as possible. So at 22, they would go into an adult living situation, and so hardest job I ever had. Learned sign language, learned Braille, learned all about IEPs and special education, and but what I really learned was the joy of seeing a student work very hard and then accomplish their goals, and their pride of doing that. And the first time that happened, really, the first big goal that a student of mine made was tying his shoes, and that was excellent, because he liked the Converse shoes. He didn't like any other shoes. That's the shoes that he really preferred, and they're all lace up, so he had to learn how to tie them. And so that was something that that really sticks with me. I'm still a teacher at heart. I taught a long time in Bill Ricca, 7th grade social studies. What motivates me is when the light bulb goes on for all kids. When they feel that they can accomplish something and they feel more independent and more empowered. And that's what education can do to all. And hopefully, now I do it sort of indirectly as an assistant superintendent, but really trying to empower all students so that they can chart their own pathway and they're prepared for whatever comes their way, as an adult in this crazy world that we live in, where who knows what's going to happen, as they become adults. As long as they're prepared with the critical thinking skills and the knowledge that they have, they will be ready as they move on, and that's what drives me, and really that's the center and the heart of all the decisions that I make, currently as the assistant superintendent of teaching and learning. So that's a little bit about myself.
So we often receive feedback that the district needs to improve in the areas of communication and transparency. How would you ensure effective communication and transparency with the district, educators, and the Holliston community as a whole? And what strategies have you employed in your career to build trust and open lines of communication with key stakeholders?
That's a good question. I've heard that a lot in my visit, which is good. I'm glad it's the first question here. Communication is a loaded word. Often that's something that people say if they're dissatisfied with what everything is happening in the district. Well, the district didn't communicate well, because people think of communication in different ways. Like one person might just want information. One person might talk about communication as not being able to be part of the seat of the table, to make the decision process. I think many people, when they talk about communication, they mean that they are not being listened to. And that is the start of any communication, is the listening. And good listening skills, making sure that the person knows that you understand their point of view, goes a long way. Whether you can come to a consensus and come to an agreement, or you can't and you have to disagree, at least the person knows that you understand where they're coming from, can empathize with what they're thinking, and they in turn might be able to understand your reasoning of why you're making a decision that's not favorable to them. So that's a really important thing to do that. One of the skills that I do, and really that kind of communication, is face-to-face dialogue. There's no substitute. And I think there's a lot of communication strategies as far as disseminating information, but when it comes to problem solving, it's face-to-face dialogue that really makes all the difference. What I try to do is I try to walk down the ladder of inference. I listen first. Often people come with assumptions. There's sort of the data that everyone does, and then you kind of make meaning out of the data, and you come in, and sometimes you come in upset or angry with coming with some assumptions. And so one thing that I try to do is I try to act with curiosity, lean into the conversation, ask really questions to get down to the heart of the matter, which is what the incident, the actual incident is, or what the data is. And then, and only then, do I walk up my ladder of inference as far as what meaning do I build out of that? And it might be similar. We might be able to find common ground. It might be quite different. But as long as we sort of go through that process, I think that's a terrific way of going about it. So I'm not sure if I answered the whole question. So if there's parts of the question that I missed.
No, that was it.
Because I didn't talk about, again, I can, but I only have 5 minutes. There's a lot that I can talk about as far as public dissemination and things like that.
What have you done in your current role to disseminate important information to the community?
So we have a communication plan. I mean, there's regular communication that we do as a district, but some communication comes from central office. Much of the communication comes from principals, and then there's very important information that comes from teachers. And there's expectations for all 3 levels of communication, and there's very different. There's very predictable methods of communication. So, for instance, we work with our PTO. We have a terrific PTO in Weston that works in partnership with us to create a newsletter that comes out every Sunday called Westward. And it's a collaborative effort between the central office and the district level PTO leaders. And so a lot of the announcements, of community events, but also of school events, happen predictably every week on Sunday in the Westward. And that is our one sort of district-wide communication that announces events. Principals have a weekly communication with parents that only pertain with happenings in their schools. That also happens once a week at a predictable time. It's different for every principal. Our middle school principal likes a Friday afternoon communication, and actually his communication goes to both students and families. And often those communications are loaded with pictures. And it really comes from a principal's voice. And, for instance, our middle school principal, who's expert at this, will even talk about the week. Sometimes the week is a hard week for students, and sometimes it's an excellent week for students. And the pictures often celebrate the work that students are doing in the school. Similarly, our teachers, usually about once every 2 or 3 weeks, or at the beginning of a major unit, will have communications for parents as well. So it's a systematic way of going about it. Every district has its own system. I'm really curious about what Holliston's system is going to be. And then I'll work within that system as far as we want to do it, as long as it's consistent and predictable so that parents know when to expect the communications.
It's a long question, so I will do the first part, and then we'll go to the second part.
Okay.
How do you intentionally build and sustain a safe, positive, and inclusive district culture for all students, staff, and families, particularly those from marginalized groups, immigrant communities, or who may experience prejudice or bullying?
That's only the first part.
That's the first, yeah.
Okay.
It's about as equal in the second part, so I can keep going, or if you want to start there and then...
Let me start there,
Okay.
and then we can go there. Let me tell you a little. We have a challenge in Weston. I mean, there's been an increase in anti-Semitism across the nation. We had some incidents in Weston in October and November, like in about a 2 or 3 week span. We had 2 incidents of graffiti with swastikas at the middle school, and then 1 at the high school. All separate incidents from different students, and then we had racist graffiti at the middle school as well. So we felt that we were doing a lot of proactive work to sort of eliminate that, but times change, students change, schools change, and we saw that we weren't doing enough. So first of all, I think we need to divide things into 2. Harm happens, even in the best districts. It's all districts encounter bullying. All districts encounter hate. And it disproportionately affects our less represented groups. So there's a few things that we are doing this year in order to do that. We do a lot already, but what we haven't been able to do enough yet. So first of all, working with our principals, our high school and middle school principals, we needed to react to those incidents firmly by denouncing the attacks or the incidents of hate. And we are clear about denouncing the attack, not the person. And of course, the person's anonymous, because we need to protect privacy. But we need to make sure that everyone, in clear words, that hate has no place in the schools. And we name the attack, exactly what the attack is, and how that impacts certain groups, whether it's Jewish students for the swastikas or black and brown students for the racist graffiti. We also, at the middle school, we held whole school assemblies. At the high school, we felt it was more important to really have lessons in our advisory periods. And our teachers really did a phenomenal job, particularly our social studies teachers did a phenomenal job of developing lessons that really were at appropriate age, so that they knew that those symbols were absolutely wrong, and they gave the historical and social perspectives to that. We held community forums because there were a number of families who were deeply hurt and troubled by that spate of incidents. We explained to them what our plan was, and as far as the advisory lessons and the assemblies, as far as the reaction was concerned. And we also invited them to participate in a long-range plan, which I'll get to, as far as what we're going to do proactively in order to combat these incidents. Every student needs to feel that they can bring their whole selves to school when they learn, to bring their learning. If they are worried or anxious or scared or afraid or angry because of these acts, they're not going to have any learning. So we need to repair those damages. So what we did is we also invited any student who was affected, counseling services, and we brought in district counselors moved toward the middle school or to the high school, depending on when the actions happened, so that we could give more support for students as well. And students were able to take advantage of that support. Actually, more students came for that support than we had thought. But the important part is what we do proactively there. And so I'm actually the sort of the major leader of our BIDE committee, which is Belonging, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. I know you have a DEIB community, which is the same acronym in different order. I work together with the high school assistant principal, the middle school assistant principal, the director of nursing, and our METCO director. So actually it's a 5 leadership committee. We have about 40 or 50 people on the committee. And part of our action after these actions was to open the committee to anybody who wanted to join. We're not a gatekeeper. If anyone's interested in helping us, we do that. So we have a really nice representative number of teachers, administrators, parents, community members, and especially students who can really, whose voices are very helpful there. And we're in the process of developing an anti-hate plan. We have, we sent out a survey. We had community forums. Our admin council also participated in this. What we had people do in the BIDE committee, in the admin council, and the community forums is to fill out a Padlet with brainstormed ideas in different categories. What are we going to do to educate students? What are we going to do for professional development for teachers? How are we going to change systems of structures? How are we going to address school culture? How are we going to outreach to the community? And we're in the process right now of synthesizing that information and then bringing that back. And I'm sorry I'm going long, but this is a really important topic, and I think it deserves a little time. And hopefully I can talk a little more about it maybe down the road.
Well, do you have the second half? You did get through.
Oh my goodness.
But good news is you covered most of it. So the one piece, I'll read it all, but there's really one piece I think we can drill into for a minute. Can you share specific examples of policies, practices, or initiatives? I think you shared a lot of that. You have implemented in the past, and explain how you evaluate whether those efforts are having a meaningful and measurable impact on the school climate and student well-being. So if you cover that last part to...
So the data part,
yeah.
How are these initiatives working?
Moving the needle, yep.
Right. So I think with that sense of belonging, the way you can get at it is through surveys. And there's surveys that we have to do. There's the vocal survey that kids take after the MCAS that talks about school climate. There's also our youth risk behavior survey, and we do the Metro West, which I think a lot of districts in this area do as well, and that's a really helpful thing right there. But that's usually not enough, because that sort of gives us sort of quantitative data. But what we need to do when we actually think about belonging is that we actually need to really interview students, whether they're in focus groups or whether they're individually. We need to focus on those particular students in those underrepresented groups, hear those stories, and ask them about their feeling of belonging in the school. Parents as well. One thing that I advocate is having an overall district satisfaction survey that we send yearly to teachers, to students, and to families as well, and that data could also be that data could also be helpful. And then being very transparent about it. You know, sometimes you get ugly data coming from surveys, but being very matter of fact. Okay, here's some place that we might need to grow. But that's the kind of data that you can use to see whether that feeling of belongingness is setting, you know, is coming into place in a district.
That's it for that question.
Thank you.
I have kind of a two-piece question as well. How do you balance supporting struggling students while also challenging advanced learners to ensure a rigorous education for all? And if any examples would be great. The second part is, how do you ensure student voice meaningfully informs district decisions and that students feel heard and valued?
That's what our kids talked about, our high school kids talked about in my meeting with them. Good. I'll start with the first. So some people really, actually, there's sort of a tendency to think that high rigor and then that equity of teaching all students is sort of like it's sort of binary. You only can have one or the other. Excellent teachers can do both. All right, and that actually is a hallmark of what excellent teachers can do. So there are a lot of teaching practices that are known to keep the standards high, challenge students who need that challenge, and bring students who might be struggling to those high standards. One practice that we're focusing on in Weston is universal design for learning, which is a framework where we set firm goals, but we provide flexible means for students to achieve those goals. And that, you know, in more detail means that those goals need to be standard-based and applied to all students. There are no exceptions. We need to make sure that students have clear success criteria so they know exactly what it will take in order for them to meet that goal. We need to account for choice and how to get to the goal, whether it's multiple means of expression, multiple means of representation, and the like. We then need to formatively assess to see whether students are meeting those goals, and then we differentiate. We challenge those students who have already met those goals and to go deep and to move further. And for those students who haven't yet met those goals, we provide more scaffolding, we provide alternate ways of teaching, and if necessary, we provide intervention. So that's universal design for learning in a nutshell. There's also social emotional learning is also a way to remove barriers. Culturally responsive teaching is a way to remove barriers, and I can go on and on because I'm an assistant superintendent of teaching and learning, and this is my wheelhouse. So, but I'll stop there as far as what an example is, as far as being able to teach to all levels and make sure that all students succeed. Now, student voice is really interesting. There's a couple of things that we talked about in my conversation with students. I mean, I think students, we had a number of student council representatives when I was talking to the high school students. In fact, we had one of the class presidents there, and that's a great start, having that kind of student governance. I think that one of the students was frustrated that what they were doing was, planning social activities and raising money for the prom, which is also an important thing because that's a ticket there. But they were hopeful that they could actually make more of a difference, as far as how the school was run, how the district was run. So I put some examples in front of them as far as what they do. One thing that we have in Weston is that we found that actually the student council, because it's one of those elected things, a certain kind of student, leads student council, but we have other student leaders that might not, running for student council might not be the way for them. So actually, organically, what we ended up doing is we ended up developing a coalition of club leaders. The Black Student Union, our LGBTQ plus Alliance, some service organizations like our Key Club and other things like that. And so there's a number of student leaders who lead these organizations that all have sort of the same goals as far as service and as far as equity. And so they kind of call themselves like the Diversity Coalition. And actually, the most powerful work that our Weston High School students do is sort of when the Diversity Coalition and the Student Council sort of work together. So here's an example that happened 3 years ago. And really, we had some extraordinary students lead this. And sometimes you're kind of awe of what students can do that maybe what adults can't do. So we had this coalition really think about how we can make sure that our non-binary students and our transgender and non-binary students had a welcoming place at Weston High School. And what they were advocating for is a school committee policy, that addressed those issues. Certainly was a hot potato. In Weston, we have we have a division, in our town. We have a strong set of students and families that are liberal / progressive, and then we have a sort of an equal number of families that are conservative. And our administrators worked, particularly our high school principal at the time, worked hard with this group to so that they learned about like what school committee policy was like, looking at models of what school committee policy, and they ended up together drafting a policy to present to the school committee. And I was so proud when our students were presenting the policy for school committee presentation. And I will tell you, I believe personally that because our students in that group presented that policy, that's why the policy was passed. So it's in our handbook, and it was a proud moment for me. So that's another reason why we can do that. A couple quick other things. I love having students on interviews. So right now we're interviewing. We're losing two terrific people to retirement: our music director and our Metco director. We're setting up our teams right now, and on our teams are students from 8th to 12th grade. And it's really interesting when you get a student perspective on an interview team, because what often they think is instead of all the curriculum and instruction that I think about is when I try to judge candidates, they ask the candidates, "Are you going to see me?" And it also gives the candidates a message that, yes, our students are important. They're on our interview committees. And I think that's another powerful message that we can get students involved in.
Thank you. Managing controversy and navigating conflict among stakeholders, including school committee, admin, staff, families, and the broader community, is a core responsibility of the superintendent. Please describe a situation in which you addressed an issue involving strongly differing viewpoints. How did you balance ethical leadership, transparency, and respect for diverse perspectives while working toward a positive resolution? And what strategies did you use to build trust and secure consensus?
Thank you. Trying to find a topic I can tell you.
There.
Well, since you're working through this as well, we worked on our high school and middle school schedule. And as everyone knows, time is probably the most valuable resource that a school district has. And the organization of time is a political activity where there are haves and have-nots, and often there are trade-offs, and we can't please everyone all the time. That's evident in that if you look at the high school schedules across Massachusetts, it's very hard to find two high schools having the same schedule because there is no perfect schedule. If there was a good schedule, that we would have a bunch of high schools following it, but there's not. So the big debate, let me give you some background. Our new superintendent, she's in year 3 right now, but when she was doing her listening and learning tour, one of the themes that came out of her findings was there was complaints about the schedule. The problem is that different people complained about the schedule for different reasons. Some people wanted more choice for students. Other people was really concerned about the time on learning that was happening, because we have and we're continuing to have an 8-block schedule, and fitting 8 blocks in a school day sort of reduces the amount of instructional time in a given class. And students who may learn differently, may have slower processing speeds, may need a little more time, they get disadvantaged, when the instructional time gets shortened. So that was very important for us as well. The problem is with a fixed school day, and following the union contract of when, school starts and school ends, you can't have everything. And so there was sort of a great debate that was sort of being set up, where some people were on the fewer classes but more deeper learning side of things, or on the more classes and more choice, kind of side of things. So what we did is, the superintendent allowed me to be sort of a point person of this, because I have a lot of experience being a principal and working with schedules. We convened a team of stakeholders. We had teachers, including the union president, on the team. We had a school committee member, 2 school committee members on the team, we have a 5-member school committee, so 2 is the max that we can do before that. We had some administrators, and we had some students, and we had some parents, all working together on the team. And collaboratively, we looked at many, many schedules. We came up with a value system as far as what we valued in a school schedule. And then we vetted that to the overall community to see if they agreed with our values as far as that whole thing is concerned. Then we came back and we actually drafted 3 schedules that would sort of comport with the values. But of course, some values would be held a little bit more priority with some schedules than others. Some of the schedules were 7-block schedules that we presented. Some of them were 8-block schedules. We went back to the community and asked them, do you have a preference as far as the schedule is concerned? And gradually, there came to a consensus. And really, I think it was coming from the student voice again, that the 8-block schedule was the preferred schedule. But one thing that we had to do is we had to acknowledge the weaknesses of that schedule and really be sure that, hey, this is what we're going to, because again, the time on learning per class wasn't where we want it to be. We ended up proposing a schedule that was very similar to our 8-block schedule now, because we liked the five classes per day. It was sort of a 5-drop-3 schedule, and I know you have a 5-drop-2 schedule, so it's kind of similar to that. We added a Wildcat block. We're the Wildcats in Weston, and a Wildcat block will allow for flex time for advisory, for assemblies and things like that. So we have a once-a-week Wildcat block. We're right now in the process of really dotting the I's and crossing the T's, doing the negotiations as far as the teaching loads are concerned, because we went from an 8-day cycle to a 10-day cycle. And we're well on our way to implementing the schedule next year. But we can't stop there, because we have some very disappointed people who really advocated strongly for a 7-block schedule with deeper learning. So one thing that we will be planning to do is we're planning to meet with parents in those forums so that they can express their disappointment. But they know that the process was public and transparent, and so even though they don't disagree with the outcome, perhaps, and again, some people will think that because the process was transparent and there ended up coming to a relative consensus of that 8-block schedule, that they can sort of take that news there. But listening to them again is really important, and that will be a next step that we'll do down the road.
Can you please share some specific examples of how you have addressed achievement gaps among various student groups, whether it's looking at anything from test scores to absenteeism data in any of your previous roles? What data has informed your decisions, and how did you ensure equitable access to high-quality instruction and supports?
Yeah.
And how would you apply those strategies for Holliston? Okay,
good. That word achievement gaps is sort of a loaded word, because I think some people interpret it as it's the student, it's the responsibility of the student there. So systems are designed with the outcomes that they have. Across the state, we have gaps, but I'd like to sort of categorize them more as opportunity gaps, because really it's the responsibility on the district to remove the barriers so that students can access the curriculum and learn to those high levels. There is a recipe for success here, backed by research. It's clear. Hard to implement, but it's clear. I use an analogy of the lunch in the lunchbox, all right? And I got it from a consultant that it just stuck with me. I learned it in a conference. It's not my own idea, but I think it's a really good thing. The lunch is the nutrition, it's the food, it's the actual instruction, all right? And there are 3 sets of equitable teaching practices that really serve to remove barriers, and I talked about them before. Universal design for learning, culturally responsive teaching, social emotional learning. That needs to happen in each and every classroom effectively, and that's easier said than done. Teaching's hard, especially when our call is to teach all students. The lunch box is the high quality curricular materials and the multi-tiered system of support, which is also a very involved process. But you combine those together and gaps close. We're on our way. I've been there 8 years. Really, the full force of our professional learning, at the grade level and department level, has really been on these equitable teaching practices. We started with social emotional learning. How do we get the PBIS system, that's the positive behavior intervention system, and and we used curriculum from Responsive Classroom to really give our elementary and middle school students a solid foundation in social emotional learning. COVID hit. We learned how to teach remotely, so we took a little break. But then once we came back, we really focused on culturally responsive teaching for a couple of years. How do we use culture and language, home language, as an asset versus a liability? And how can we leverage the differing backgrounds that our students have, to have richer instruction. And a lot of strategies have incorporated. My favorite culturally responsive strategy is called the learning pit. How do we create situations where kids have to work together to solve really complex problems together with some scaffolding from the teaching, trying to get them out of that sort of struggle zone and trying to get that struggle time, longer and longer. And then finally, the universal design for learning that I talked pretty extensively in a previous question. The multi-tiered system of support has to do with win blocks or flex blocks, has to do with data teams, it has to do with a wide range of interventions in the academic and the social, emotional, and the behavioral levels. It is a lot. It has to do with scheduling. It has to do with, it's a complicated system, but that's the framework where we can give students what they need at the right time.
This question expands a little bit on your mention of social emotional learning, but I'll read it as
good.
is. Please describe your philosophy regarding social emotional learning and its role in student success. What qualitative and quantitative data have you used to assess student well-being and school climate for both students and staff? How have you led or supported initiatives to strengthen SEL and overall wellness at both the school and district level?
Okay. All right, you can go deep into social emotional learning here. So there's two reasons that back social learning. One's a neurological reasoning is that, and I think I said this before, like when a student is feeling that they don't belong and they don't have skills to build relationships, to self-regulate, to make responsible decisions, the learning gets shut down. So that's one reason. So it's sort of a prerequisite. It's not an add-on. Like a lot of people think social learning is something extra that we do. It's the plate upon we can do our academic work. The second thing has to do with more practical. It's a more practical reason. I think all of us know someone who might need some work on their social emotional learning. Like I know there's some family members that I have and some close friends that I have that could use a little more help there. And I know they're having challenges in their lives. I also know that in the work world, more people get fired because of a deficit in their social emotional skills than a deficit as far as their work-related skills, their expertise in their area. I think that's pretty, and if you are sort of in that mode where you are involved with, personnel and hiring and firing, I'm thinking that in your experience, that might resonate with you. We're preparing students for, the second half of the 21st century in jobs that we don't understand. They're going to have to work with each other. They're going to have to make responsible decisions. They're going to have to understand who they are and regulate themselves. That is paramount, and that's just as important as the academic content that we do that. Our elementary teachers and many of our middle school teachers understand that. It's our high school teachers that sometimes when you get to the content area that we have to sort of work with, at least in our district, that's the case there. So that's the reason why social emotional learning is so important. And go on, can I go to the next one?
Sure.
Let's go.
So how do you use qualitative and quantitative data to support and how have you used it to support both school climate for students and staff?
Okay. So just as we have screeners for like reading, there are screeners for social emotional learning as well, or those skills that we have. Often there's sort of self-report surveys where students get to report and teachers get to report, and we can kind of compare the results. It's kind of weird because when we do these surveys, and we're piloting in a new tool in Weston right now, in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, we're actually seeing a real match between student self-reporting and teacher reporting, which is kind of interesting. They're actually pretty in touch with themselves, which is good. But that's a way to sort of identify what the deficits are. Attendance data is really important. Behavioral data, is really important as well. Trips to the nurse, trips, having to go outside of class, avoidance strategies sometimes. all that data is really important to try to target students and try to figure out. And again, that's kind of screening data. And then it's really an interview with a certified counselor to really go deeper into sort of what really is that focus area that we really need to focus on. And so that's what our counseling staff really does as far as collecting data to try to figure out how to support our students that have gaps, have deficits that can, that we can bolster them, in real time, just like we would do like if a student was struggling in reading.
So we've touched on this a little bit, but leading meaningful change often requires challenging long-standing practices, especially if data no longer supports those past practices. Can you please describe a time when you encountered resistance to change from staff or other stakeholders, and how you successfully led the organization forward? What strategies did you use to maintain trust, morale, and momentum? How would you work with union leadership to overcome any initial concerns or objections regarding proposed changes? I have one quick follow-up, but
okay,
that might be, that's a good
all
start.
Right. Good. Let's talk about reading, elementary reading. We are adopting high-quality reading curriculum. Actually, it's a combination of different curriculums there, and I'm going to tell you the story behind it because it was a process. When I arrived in Weston in 2018, it was a little bit like the Wild West. Generally, elementary teachers taught what they thought they could, and there's a lot of curriculum that was shared among elementary teachers, and they did the best they can, and we have some amazing teachers, but there was no standard curriculum that they had taught, except that we were starting a soft pilot in writing, not in whole literacy, just in the writing, with the Lucy Calkins units of study. So I came on board, and this is 2018. This is before that whole science of reading, the podcast and everything that happened there. And it seemed reasonable, and we had a committee, a curriculum adoption committee, and we looked at a number of different curriculum options, and we felt that the Lucy Calkins units of study would be good for both reading and writing, and we implemented that along with Foundations, which is a phonics curriculum. And so we went through and implemented that, and we actually got some really good results, because going from no curriculum to a curriculum makes a big difference, particularly for those students who need consistency from grade to grade as they're developing their reading capacity. At the same time, we were really bolstering our interventions. We had sort of a one-size-fits-all intervention that we started before, and then we were able to differentiate our intervention so that we could really focus on what specific reading skill or writing skill needed work for our students. So that helped also, not just the curriculum, but also the intervention system. And when we go into class, it's a workshop model. It's really fun to see. Every student, they're either reading on themselves or their partner reading. They have a little basket of books that they have that are all selected for them. Part of the books are what they select, and part of the books are the teachers select. They have bookmarks that kind of remind them what skills that they're practicing, and they're reading away. And the student and the teacher is floating around, and they're consulting expertly with the students, acknowledging the progress that they're making, and then discussing about what next steps are going to be. And when you observe that lesson, those kinds of lessons, you are like, wow, this is so much better than what we had before. And when we actually looked at the hard data, 85% of our kids did well, like they always do. And those 15% of those students who are often on the margins continued to drop back. And it started right in second grade, and it continued, those gaps kept on continuing to get bigger and bigger and bigger as they were going over to fifth grade. So while the Lucy Calkins curriculum was helpful for many students, we are committed to serving each and every student in our district, and it wasn't reaching our other students, even with the Foundation's help in phonics and there. So what we did is we shared the curriculum with our teachers, the data with our teachers. And it was one of those things where we arranged the district data in, sort of a manageable thing, like a front and a back, so that we could actually sort of see, the disaggregated data sort of in a way of time. And we let the teachers themselves, okay, so what does the data say? And, they had to come to the conclusion that we weren't serving this bottom 15% with the Tier 1 instruction. So at least they understood what the problem was. But in their observations, they were proud themselves that, man, reading has gotten a whole lot better. Look at this classroom. Everyone's going like clockwork. Everyone's reading. Everyone's engaged in the books. It seemed like it was working, but it wasn't enough. Because, again, and the science of reading was coming out at that time, and it became apparent that there were some deficits in the units of study curriculum. Learning more about the science of reading, and then looking at the curriculum, and I was learning along with everybody else about this. It was clear that the application of the phonics and the phonemic awareness that was, and the decoding that was necessary, wasn't as explicit as it could be for some of our learners in the units of study curriculum. So that was our conclusion. When we got our reading interventionists and all our reading experts in the district, that was our collective conclusion. And messaging that to the teachers was hard because they felt they were doing well. And they were doing better than before. And it's not because of their teaching, it was because of the materials. We then engage our teachers. Anyone who wanted to join would join our team to review other, new curriculum. And that was about a half a year long process of really, vetting a whole bunch of different programs. And I found out that there's a lot of, science of reading curriculum that is really not a fit for Weston, that's for sure. We ended up we had three, again, just like the schedules, we had a top three. We really dove deep in those top three. We sort of had a month-long pilot, data collection cycle for each of the curriculum materials, and different teachers piloted different curriculum so that we wouldn't load the teachers completely there. They came back with their findings. We discussed the positives and negatives. And what we ended up determining is that we chose one curriculum, it's EL for Education that we're using, but we actually weren't satisfied with any of the curriculum's phonics and phonemic awareness. So we kept foundations and redoubled our efforts to teach it with fidelity, and we added Hegarty for phonemic awareness. So actually we have three curriculums now that are sort of working in concert. And we're implementing it now. At different paces and at different grades, because some grades really needed a deep dive into making sure that foundations was being taught with fidelity. So the lower grades are starting the EL curriculum, while the upper grades, where phonics is not as a big a part of the reading, started at the beginning of the year. And we're getting good results. We have teacher buy-in. Everyone's working at it. There's still some complaints here and there, but it's progressing, much quicker and smoother than we had expected, and it's because of all that pre-work that we did with teachers in the first place.
Great. And then just quickly, what do you believe is the most powerful word in the English language?
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
That's a good one. So I'm a big fan of Dr. King, Martin Luther King. So I will say that Kingian version of love. Love, as Dr. King, talks about how love conquers everything. That's a powerful word.
Great. Thank you.
All right. I have another question around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And
Oh my goodness.
I know. I think that you spoke.
Maybe I'll go quick on this one.
I think you've answered part of it already, but
Okay.
I'll read the question, and
All
if
right.
there's anything you want to add, and then if you maybe add to the second part.
Okay.
So advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging requires both courageous leadership and meaningful collaboration. Can you please describe what a genuine commitment to this looks like in your leadership practice and share specific examples of how you have advanced it in your current or prior role, including how you've supported staff learning, aligned systems and policies, and engaged stakeholders? And how would you continue and deepen this work in our district, particularly during times of public tension or disagreement?
Okay. So all my examples I kind of used. I'm leading the BI committee, and we're doing the anti-hate work. The gender nonconforming policy was a really, a big piece. So it's probably the most fundamental thing that we're working on in modern education is really promoting, that teaching all students. And students have to bring their whole selves to their learning in order to really learn effectively. And that's really a passion of mine. But equity work is complicated, it's iterative, and it's loud. There is a lot of emotion, and a lot of that emotion is actually valid emotion, even though many people might think differently. And it is a test on what your core values are. And it's really important when we think of students' sense of belonging, and I think that's how I personally think about equity, is that all of our students need to feel that they belong so that they can learn as powerfully as they can. And when you're a leader, that has to be a principle. That has to be sort of your hill to die on. When you're, and you need to be able to articulate that and communicate that why to people who may question that. And then listen with curiosity, understand other people's point of view, empathize with their concerns, but still not budge. And it has to be done with the superintendent as the lead, but everyone sort of needs to do that as part of the team. Our administrators, our teachers, and our school committee. I think we need to be, as one when we're advocating for the education of our students. And one thing that attracted me to Holliston was that commitment that's clearly, that we can clearly see in the vision of a graduate, in the strategic plan, in the core values and mission of the district. So I'm not sure if that answered all the questions, but I got a bunch of,
You shared a lot of
That's
examples.
enough? Okay,
Yeah,
good, thank you.
So, with the rise in anti-Semitism nationwide and really worldwide, I was going to ask you about how you've addressed it in your career, and you kind of already answered that with Frank's question earlier in the interview. So I guess maybe could you delve a little bit deeper into some specific examples of how you've addressed it? You mentioned assemblies. I know some districts bring in Holocaust survivors. Some districts receive grants to support the curriculum that is now mandated by the state. So what kind of specific things are you doing in Weston?
Kind of all that. No, I'll go back and try to be sort of systematic about it. So the first major thing that we need to do, to be proactive about this, is really think about student education. And when we look at our scope and sequence and things like that, what we found in Weston is that we do a really good job starting in 8th grade, but that might be a little too late. So in 8th grade, we have the Washington trip. They go to the National Holocaust Museum. We read Night. It's an interdisciplinary unit between English and social studies that prepares for that. It's a really good thing. And then our 10th grade world history is a real deep dive into genocide and its effects. And the Holocaust is one example of a number of examples. It's more of a comparative history piece to it. So from that point of view, from 8th grade up, I think we actually do a very good job. What we need to do is we need to think about what we want to do from about 3rd grade through 7th grade. Because we need to be able to teach students explicitly that there are some symbols that we just don't draw. And there is some language that we just don't say, and the reasons behind that. So we're working on trying to find, the right curriculum for the right level, there. And probably it needs to be a little bit iterative so that they get a little of it and then a little more and a little more as they move from upper elementary to through middle school. So that's one thing that we're focusing on, that we're trying to find right now. We are asking, and we're actually partnering with a number of, with the Anti-Defamation League. We have a local rabbi that's been very helpful for us, that has really given us a lot of guidance, as far as helping that. For our racist comments, we've connected with the ACLU. Actually, Metco Inc., the Metco organization, has been very helpful for us, providing materials, figuring that out. But maybe we bring back, Diary of Anne Frank or another similar kind of book like that, for younger readers, as one of our core reading books. We have to have that discussion. We haven't made those decisions yet, but we know that we have to do something in those grades. So that's the one thing that we need to do. Second thing we need to do is we need to train teachers. First of all, teachers sort of need to understand or feel empathy for how someone who is Jewish, how someone who is black or brown, how someone who is LGBTQ+, how someone who has, special, neurological needs. And again, there's a diversity of experience. I'm not going to lump everyone into one sort of category, but how is that manifesting in 2026? And what's the history, of the cause? And then how is it leading to, what we're doing there? So that's one piece of it. But probably a more important piece for teachers is that how to be an upstander in the moment when you actually witness a microaggression. And how do you practice that? I mean, we've had a lot of professional learning or professional development sessions where we talk about it with a cup of coffee, but how do we practice that and get coaching, when we see that? Harder to do, because sometimes, you never know when a microaggression might come up, and things like that. How, what's the appropriate response, and how can we make that practice? So that's another sort of a dilemma, conundrum that we're kind of grappling with right now, because I think that's really important training for all of our staff. And I'm not just talking about teachers. I'm talking about learning assistants. I'm talking about our bus drivers, particularly our bus drivers, because what we're finding is that much of our behavior is happening on the bus. So that's the second thing. Third thing, systems and structures. How can we maximize our school-based preventative structures and our school response structures? And it's not just discipline. It's also about reporting. It's about following process, making sure that everyone knows that there's certain process for harassment complaints versus bullying complaints versus violate the student handbook complaints. And then Title IX's on another different story, and everyone's sort of there. What we're going to do with our bullying prevention and intervention handbook is add a section on harassment, because there are different practices and practices that we have to follow. When the harm is against a protected class. So that's another thing. Fourth is, how do we change school culture? And fifth is, how do we reach out to families and the communities? Do we have informational forums? Do we have celebrations that celebrate, the diversity that happens in Weston? That kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Recruiting, hiring, and retaining a high-quality professional teaching and support staff is critical to the success of our schools and students. As superintendent, describe for us your approach to attracting and retaining new staff, including diverse staff, and supporting the ongoing growth of all teachers and paraprofessionals in the schools. What is your role in that process as superintendent, and what programs have you had success with that you could bring to Holliston to help with retention for teachers, staff, paraprofessionals?
Great, good. So it's hiring and it's also retention, and actually retention is very important. So I'm going to try to do that. But I got to tell one of my favorite stories, because this is a good one. When I was in Watertown, we won a State Department grant of critical languages, and in Watertown, the right language to teach was Arabic. And so we piloted Arabic with some visiting teachers from Egypt who taught Arabic, and then for 2 years, and then it was time to hire our own Arabic teacher. And it was a really proud moment, because actually our Arabic program really grew, and many of our students, either their first language or sometimes their second language was Arabic, and that was really helpful for us. And so we hired a young woman from Medford, who was born and raised in Medford, but who was Palestinian, and she was as fashionable as could be, but she also wore a hijab and had followed the clothing requirements that many of our young female students in Watertown also did. And when they saw that teacher, even if they didn't take Arabic, their eyes lit up. And she became a role model. And really, that is, if someone from a marginalized group or an underrepresented group sees a teacher that kind of looks and follows the same cultural traditions as them, it forms a connection. So one student really became close with her, and she convinced her to try out for basketball. And she was a good athlete. I mean, she was kind of rough on her basketball skills, but she held her own, and she was actually within the rotation, in the 8th grade basketball team. And she wrote we have a Martin Luther King breakfast in Watertown, and there's an essay contest that goes along with it, and 8th graders write an essay. And she wrote about how her team accepted her because she had to wear her hijab and be all covered, with her basketball uniform in front. And it was a beautiful essay about how she was able to be accepted by her teammates in her school. And also, it was a learning experience for the opposing team, because they had never seen that. And so that was just it was a beautiful essay, and I don't know, that's really an example of what an inclusive school is. So how do we get there? Part of it's hiring, and couple of things that we do. First of all, we like students on our hiring team because they provide that perspective, and that's something that's helpful. Second, we generally will do some anti-bias training for our hiring committees. We scour, and it's really hard to find people of color to come and teach because, again, they often aren't afforded the opportunity, or they decide to go in different directions. But we do scour, and we do work very hard on the human resources side of things to try to attract and recruit candidates. We go to job fairs and things like that. And to be honest, moderate success. We haven't had really good success. One thing that's really helpful is that we partner with Regis College. Regis College is in Weston, and many of our learning assistants, we are actually more successful in attracting people of color for our learning assistant positions. And then what we can do is we can partner with Regis, who gives these people a discount and provides the sort of the practicum experience in Weston, so that learning assistants can go through a pipeline in order to become teachers. And we have a number of learning assistants who are taking advantage of the opportunity, but we haven't gained the results yet, about that. But that grow your own pipeline is a really good thing. And actually, we want to expand that to students. And one of the seniors that I met with today is doing an internship with teaching, and I guess that's a big thing in Holliston, where many of our older high school teachers do teaching internships, which is awesome. That's exactly the kind of grow your own flower, because it's only going to be 5 more years until she's employable. And she can go right back to Holliston and teach. And doing that would be really helpful as well, particularly now that the workforce is diminishing. Fewer people want to become educators, and partly it's because teaching is harder than ever, as we move forward. So those are some of those things that we can do to recruit diverse educators. And I didn't talk about retention too, but I don't think I have time. Okay, all right, all right.
Well, that's hard to follow, but I'm going to do my best.
That was a good story, wasn't it?
No, seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, we're getting into finance now, and that's.
Oh my goodness! I don't have a story like that for finance.
No, that was a great story, and so anyway, budgets are obviously always challenging. No one ever has enough money, and we're obviously not here for budgets, but we're here for the kids. But budgets impact the kids and what we can do and what we can afford for them. Can you please describe your role in financial planning, financial management, in any of the roles that you've had in your career? How have you balanced strategic investment in district priorities with the responsible stewardship of taxpayer resources? How have you ensured that financial decisions align with the district's mission, strategic plan, and student needs? And then also, how have you balanced sometimes the priorities of the school committee with the priorities of the administration, priorities of the teachers, even if they all sort of fit within the strategic plan? Because money is limited, you can only do certain things.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's a couple more.
Let me start. This is a growth area for me. I'm an assistant superintendent for teaching and learning.
Yep. I'm
not a sitting superintendent, and that's one thing that I want to acknowledge, that this is going to be helpful. And Dr. Jordan was my tour guide, and I'm grateful that if I get this position, I get to work with him. And so actually, a lot of our talk, going from place to place, was about my learning curve, about the budgets. But let me tell you what I know and what I, and I'll try to answer the question as best I can. Also, I want you to keep in mind that the assistant superintendent's job is to do whatever that the superintendent wants them to do. So there's a time last year where our assistant superintendent of finance and operation suddenly resigned. And in that time between him resigning and finding an interim and then replacing that was right in the heart of budget season, and so there was a good 6 weeks to 2 months where my teaching and learning hat was put aside and my budget and finance hat was put on. So I do have some experience, but again, not like what a sitting superintendent might have. So I think let me just go through the process, and maybe I'm answering the questions as far as the process is concerned, and then we can go there. The process needs to be as transparent as possible. It's really important to bring in stakeholder groups as soon as you can. Now, sometimes you can't because you haven't made decisions yet, or sometimes these decisions are more confidential and they're not able to do that, so you only can sort of say like limited things. But certainly the Finance Committee is one major force in advising and working with the town as far as the budget is concerned, and bringing them into the fold and making sure that they're understanding where we are in the process as we're moving. And then also the union has a role in that. Now, it may not have a detailed role, but what we can do is we can say, like for instance, in Weston, when we calculated our level service budget with all the cost increases, particularly in special education and out-of-district placements and transportation and utilities, we knew as we were calculating what a level service budget would be, is that it was going to be really high compared to what our increase is normally. So we can give our teachers sort of a heads up. Hey, it looks like it's going to be a really tight budget year this year. Here are our numbers. Here's our calculation of what a level service budget will look like. Here are the cost increases. In Weston, they don't give us a number, which makes it a little more difficult. But in most towns, there's sort of a number that's sort of agreed upon. We're going to get to this. This is the number that that we have to work with. Some towns are a little flexible. Some towns are just solid that this is the number and we can't go over it. But that might be helpful as well. So bringing the stakeholders in as necessary and making sure that they understand what the timeline is and what the process is really important. So we create the level service budget, and I was talking to Dr. Jordan, I think he does it in 3 phases. He does salaries, he does then all the other materials, and then there's a special phase for special education. And we have the level service budget. And then what we need to do, whether we have room to add or we need to think about cuts, is we need to think about what our strategic plan and how the add or the cut is going to impact both the strategic plan, and then also I think it's important to put yourself in the shoes of students who struggle in school, and make sure that the cut or the add benefits those students, or the cut doesn't disproportionately affect those students. I think those are the sort of the 2 main, I think, criteria that we kind of have to look at. And in addition, there needs to be data that supports the proposal, whether the proposal is a cut or an add. I think there needs to be data that says that, look, this is the reason why we're making this decision. This is the why, and it needs to be supported by data. At least in Weston, it won't get by the FinCom unless there's data that supports the reasoning behind that there. And that's something that actually I really appreciate our FinCom being able to do, and really getting down into the nitty-gritty details and getting all set. Can you repeat the parts of the question that I missed? I'm sorry.
I mean, you pretty much, I think, covered most of it. You even covered the ones I didn't ask.
Okay.
So I would say, for someone whose day-to-day is not budget, you acquitted yourself well in explaining, your thought and experience there. So I think that the only, I guess, one is how do you balance the priorities between, the school committee?
Oh, that's really good,
Yeah.
because the school committee's priority has to be sustainability. Particularly when there's this big MSBA building project that's on the horizon. I mean, we need to be very mindful, because there's going to be a big ask coming down the pike, for a new high school or for a renovated high school down the road. So that's very important, to consider. Speaking as an assistant superintendent of teaching and learning, I want more. I want as much service as I can provide for our students, and actually our finance director, our current finance director, who's a veteran, and I, who is a veteran, we kind of have a running joke about me asking more, and he's saying no all the time. But that's my role. My role is to advocate for the teaching and learning. The superintendent's role is different. They have to balance the things. But our admin team, you have to be very clear about that, because it's very hard for them to think about what cuts would be the least impactful if we're cutting, and it's hard for them to sort of rein in and justify the ads that they want to do. So one example that we were able to do is we were able to actually move dollars around so that we could support our reading intervention, because there's a lot of curricular materials. We were able to get some grant money from the state, but also we needed to sort of figure out how we're going to support our teachers in the classroom as they implement the reading. So we transferred some dollars so that we could add some positions at the elementary level and sort of reorganize the elementary leadership structure so that we could provide the coaching that's necessary, to implement the reading program. That's sort of a creative budget decision that the admin council can think about as they move forward. Yeah, I'll end there.
No,
yes.
that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, as you may be aware, the MSBA invited us to the eligibility period for potential renovation or replacement of our 56-year-old high school building, so it's very exciting. As our next superintendent, you will be intimately involved in this process, working closely with our town officials, as well as planning for new and innovative instructional spaces with the school committee, staff, and families. So please describe any experience you have with capital building projects, and share with us some of the vision and opportunity you see in creating the new space. And then how would you include the voices of administrators, faculty, and staff in the decision-making process?
And students.
And yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. Okay, I'll start with my experience. I have some experience. First of all, in Watertown, we went through a repair. There's an MSBA process, not for a new building, but for repairing the existing building. Watertown Middle School has two parts to it. It's sort of two buildings squashed together. One is from 1910 and actually has great bones, and it keeps up better than our 1995 sort of edition. But the windows were completely gone, and so it was a whole window replacement and a repointing of the facade, of the three facades actually, of the old building. Multi-million-dollar progress, and I worked with the director of finance and operations and the superintendent as the principal, following the process. But that was more of me not directing the process, but me being part of the conversation as we went through the process as a principal, which was an appropriate role for a principal at that time. Watertown also has built a number of buildings, MSBA, and in my later years in Watertown was the beginning stages of planning for elementary schools. Actually, all three elementary schools got MSBA funding in Watertown, and they look beautiful now. But in that time, we were starting that process. And in Weston, we actually got approval at the same time that you got approval for our high school. But in Weston, we weren't confident that we were going to get approval because we are a high SES district, and we felt that there may be a lot of other needier districts there. And Weston, as a community, sometimes isn't as patient as other communities are too, and so we went together and did our own self-study, with one of our members of our school committee who's a sort of an expert in the field, really helping, guiding us along. And so we did our self-study, and of course we're starting from square one again with that. But we went through the process with a series of architects, and it was a really exciting process, imagining what a new high school would look like, or a combined high school middle school, because we have an option in Weston to combine our high school and middle school and make one big building. The superintendent has a distinct role in the whole process. And at the same time, the superintendent has to work really closely with the school committee and town officials to really mobilize the community to be behind the project. Now, one thing that's really attracted me in Holliston is the community support that they have for the schools. The PTO is fantastic. You were one of the rare communities that were able to pass an override, what was it, last year or 2 years ago, and override by a wide margin and not a narrow margin. So there's a lot of support, and that we're going to need to appreciate, but it's still a big price tag, and it's still going to be have a major impact on the taxpayers in this town. So the superintendent leads sort of that instructional design process. We're not the experts of the glass and the steel and the brick, but we are experts in pedagogy. And so the team that I'll lead will be really focused on eliciting feedback from all stakeholders as far as what learning spaces are necessary to teach students most effectively from now through the next 50 years, which is going to take some imagination. AI has boomed, right? What's AI going to be like in 50 years? I mean, there's a lot of things that we don't know yet as far as what we're going to do. What's that most effective learning space? Architects like to call buildings that third teacher. The parent is the first teacher, and the teacher is the second teacher, and the building is the third teacher. I don't know if I agree with them. I think students' peers might be a good a third teacher or something like that. But the building does have an impact. And I've seen beautiful buildings in the community I live in. They just built a brand new high school, and it's spectacular. So it's just I'm excited about that, but at the same time, it's also a learning curve for me because I've been in sort of the periphery of this, but I haven't gone through a whole building renovation myself. I'm going to need a lot of guidance from everyone. I'm hoping as the process goes along that we hire a project manager who's going to be really focused on this. I think that's a really important investment, a professional who knows what they're doing and can manage all the the I's being dotted and the T's being crossed. But that is one reason why I'm so excited about the Holliston opportunity. Is this opportunity, for the next 50 years, how we can serve our high school students.
How would you define leadership? And how do you demonstrate that with your leadership style? What are particular strengths do you believe you will bring to our school system? And I'll add the last part because I know we're coming short on time. What would you need to adapt or new skills you'll need to gain moving from assistant superintendent to superintendent?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. And actually, I'm going to start with that because I think that's the most important part of the question for someone like me. I think there's sort of three things that I'm going to have to really work on there. One is working with the school committee. I mean, the superintendent is the point person, with the school committee through the chair. And I am fortunate to have a superintendent that's inclusive, and so I'm in part of the discussions a lot. But it is the superintendent's prerogative, to be that primary liaison with the school committee. And how do I support your work as we work together, both in our lanes as we move forward, is something that's going to be new. It's going to be new for me, and not new for sitting superintendents. They'll have experience there, and that'll be a learning curve for me. So that's something that I recognize. I think I have great collaboration skills. I think there's a potential that we can be a great team together, but it'll be new for me, and I want to acknowledge that. The second thing that is really important that I'm going to need to work hard with, and we're fortunate to have Dr. Jordan, is that budget and finance piece. I've worked really hard internally on budget and finance, but it's the superintendent who goes and presents the budget to the town, to the finance committee, to the school committee, and that will be new for me, and that will be another adjustment there. And then finally, I think the biggest adjustment is the weight of the chair. Like, as an assistant superintendent, if I have to make a tough decision, I always talk to my boss and say, hey, what do you think? Are we on the same page? And then as the superintendent, yes, I will always talk to the school committee chair, but it's more of a collaboration, and it's more of a okay, this is what we're going to do. And I think that's what I've prepared myself for. So I'm a work in progress, like we all are. No one's a perfect leader, but I think I'm ready. I really do. I think I'm ready with my experience and my style. I think that's good, and so I'll get to my style now. I put in my cover letter that I lead from the middle, and I want to explain that a little bit. So the school district is a learning organization, and so hierarchies don't really fit what its mission is. A hierarchy is designed so that an organization can be stable. And so when we have a crisis, we have a chain of command, and that's the appropriate structure to follow. And we revert, to the hierarchy where, there's a top-down and there's a process. And our safety team, I'm sure, has a lot of structures and systems that focus on crisis management. But most of the time in a school district, the mission of the district isn't stability, it's learning. The structure that works best for learning is a network. That's what happens in our brain, right? We have the neurons going off and the centers and things like that, and there's all these connections. So that's really the work that I did with my dissertation. How networks work and how does relational trust, that key component to develop, fully connected networks. So I can use some of my positional authority if I become superintendent here to get toward the middle of the network, but it's actually the relational trust that I generate in order to get to that middle of the network where I can have as much influence as I can there. And so I have a relational leadership style, where I'm in the mix, there. One example of someone who's who's sort of at the bottom of the hierarchy, but right in the middle of the network, is that school secretary that knows everything. They have a lot of influence in the school system, and they've earned it, right? That's the person who's there, or the veteran teacher that everyone goes to. They're in the middle of the network. They have a lot more influence than someone who might be at the periphery of the network. But that's what we need to do, is we need to strengthen our connection. We need to build our connections, particularly our cross-school connections, so that our school and our central office can be more linked together. And we need to act in a trustworthy way. So quickly, what does that mean? And I'm going to model that as a superintendent, and I'm going to insist that everyone who works in the district aspire to do these things, because this is what's going to get people together to trust one another so that we can work together to do initiatives. So first of all, you got to be competent in your job. That's very important. No one's going to trust you if you can't do your job. Second, you have to respect the roles of other people. You need to make sure that you know your role, you know their role. You need to respect their role and make things go from there. Third, you need to be kind. You need to respect people as humans, and give people grace and not be so hard all the time, right? Fourth, when a connection breaks, like when trust breaks, and this happens every so often because no one's perfect, right? You have to lean in and try to repair the connection. You can't just go away. This is not about friendship. This is about professional relationships and working relationships, and there's no option other than going back and trying to work with the person that broke that trust, whether it's your fault or not. And then fifth, you have to act with integrity. You have to do what you say you're going to do. And if we all do that, from school committee to superintendent, to administrators, to teachers, to bus drivers, custodians, paraprofessionals, cafeteria workers, if we all do that as a district and we try our best, knowing that we're never going to be perfect, we will eventually form a culture, a community, where everyone is supporting one another and is accountable to another in the service of students and their families. And we got to get that done before we can do any major initiative and push forward. We got to go forward together, and the way to do that is through that. And that, in a nutshell, is my leadership style.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And the last question, and you've touched upon a lot of this, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. If you could please share how you work with administrators, staff, and the school committee to develop a vision, long-range plans, and annual goals that build trust, strengthen relationships, and bring the community together around the success of students. How do you report progress toward reaching such goals and measuring their outcomes? And how do you think the school committee should evaluate you on that progress?
Good.
Thank you.
I can actually talk about maybe my entry plan here. I think that might be a really good thing to do, because it's going to culminate in developing a new strategic plan. We're in the last year of next year is the last year of this current one, and we will continue that strategic plan. I want to make sure that everyone knows that there has been good work happening, and just because a new superintendent comes on board doesn't mean we change the process without going through a collaborative, inclusive process as far as where we want to go. So we will continue the work. We will have to sort of diagnose what we've done well, what gaps we have, and that work will go as I learn the district. So in the summer, I'm going to try to meet with as many people as possible. I'm going to ask people, who should I meet? Because you know your community, and administrators, teachers know their community. They will give me ideas, and I will probably ask a number of questions, but I know there's 3 questions that I would ask. One is, what about Holliston is so valuable to Holliston that we absolutely have to keep it? and make sure we preserve our traditions and our good practices. That's really important. Second question would be, if there is something that you would want to change about Holliston, what would that be? And the third question is sort of a vision, a 5-year vision. Like in 5 years, what would you hope Holliston could be? That kind of question. There may be other questions depending on people's roles and things like that. And I certainly would allow people to talk as much as they want, as far as whatever they want to me, because again, it's listening first and then directing the conversation after. I listen to their agenda, and then my agenda are those 3 questions plus maybe a few more questions. So that's the listening tour, and most of that will happen over the summer, but it might spill into the beginning of the year because I know some people aren't available in the summer and they come back in the school year. But then after that, during the fall, particularly as the school year kind of really gets going, it's going to be really important for me to be in the schools, really looking at the teaching and learning, really sort of working and also calibrating with our other leaders. So I wouldn't go by myself into classrooms. I would go with a principal, or I would go with a department head, or a person like that into classrooms. So what are you seeing? What am I seeing? Where are our strengths? How can we build on our strengths? What are the things that we probably need to work on? I think I need to get a good idea of the teaching and learning, and that's actually something that I'm very confident I'm going to be able to do and be able to see that. So I can collect data that way, observational data. I can interview teachers, ask them what's important to them, what would they like to be doing, and focus there. And I can also look at student work. I mean, there's often, particularly around back to school night, there's often presentations and sort of seeing what there, and I can see what the level of the student work is. All is really good data to sort of, figure out and compress. Once I have all that information, I will compile an entry finding. I don't know if you call it a report, or I don't know, that's kind of a little bit technical, but a set of findings. For the school committee. I hope to present that in a public meeting, what my entry findings are. And I will vet my findings, just so that with the admin team and with other selected leadership within the district, so that I know I'm right. Because even if I go through this process, I might be making assumptions or having sort of some prejudices or biases that might need to be corrected. So just want to show that. We have the findings, and that is the beginning of our strategic planning process, because in the spring, we're going to have to work on building a strategic plan. And so that's starting to answer the question as far as the long-range planning. We need stakeholders, in that. It's going to be a committee where we have representatives from a lot of stakeholder groups, community members, parents, students, teachers, administrators, central office leaders, school committee. And we will go through a process. We will review the mission, vision, and core values. We can make changes if we want. We can keep them the way they are. Personally, when I look at them, they look great to me right now when I'm there. But maybe I'll have a different opinion after I actually see the district. We will take a look at the vision of a graduate and where we are with that, and how we can make that live in the district, because that's going to need to be a very important part of the strategic plan as we go, because it needs to be meaningful for our students. And then finally, we will go and audit where we are with the previous strategic plan. What goals were we able to accomplish? What goals do we still have more work to do? What are our next steps there? And then we will brainstorm new goals and initiatives as we move forward. We will present the draft of the strategic plan from the committee to the wider community and have opportunity for vetting and feedback, and consider the feedback that we have as we make adjustments to the strategic plan. And then finally, sometime in May or June, we will present that to the school committee. And that will be our roadmap for the next 3 to 5 years. And so that's how I would do the strategic planning, and that's what we'll be doing next year if I'm appointed.
Thank you. Anything else? No? Well, thank you so much for coming and answering our questions. It's been a pleasure getting to know more about you. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us in support of your candidacy?
I just want to take the opportunity to thank you and your time and your dedication. It's been a long process, this hiring process, just from my perspective, and I'm just thinking about other candidates and you know, all the stages, you know, that we went through. Very thorough process. I feel that I've been heard, that I've been listened to, I feel that I'm a better person or a better leader after going through this process. Really thoughtful questions and really, and I appreciate the thought that you've made as you've gone through the process. So, just want to acknowledge that and make you there. I think the final thing that I might want to say is that from my point of view, as I'm going, particularly as I visited this day, it's about fit. We're all the finalists are highly, highly qualified people. I think you have a really hard decision, and it was my job to make your decision even harder. And I think the more and more I learn about Holliston, the more excited I am, because I think there's a fit here from my perspective. And so I just wanted to share that with you. But I wish you all the best as you make that hard decision, and I'm looking forward to that decision. Thank you.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second by John.
All in favor? Okay. And with that, good night, Holliston. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and it's been a pleasure, so thank you.
Thank you.
And good night.